Troy, somebody's written in and asked us in 1 Corinthians chapter 3, verse 12 through 15, wanting us to comment on it. And they asked, in what way will the fire try one's works, and how can one's work be burned and himself be saved? And so, very interesting question.
Yeah, it's a very interesting question. In fact, it's one of those questions that's been debated for centuries. There's a lot of different commentaries and different theologians out there who've answered this question falsely by saying that one will be purged with fire, and then once that's done, then they go on to heaven.
And you got a good, simple explanation on this, but let's read it in context so we understand what's being said. In verse 12, it says, "Now if any man build upon this foundation, gold, silver, precious stones, wood, hay, stubble, every man's work shall be made manifest, for the day shall declare it, because it shall be revealed by fire, and the fire shall try every man's work of what sort it is. If any man's work abide, which he hath built thereupon, he shall receive a reward. If any man's work shall be burned, he shall suffer loss, but he himself shall be saved, yet so as by fire." And this passage really is one that brings comfort to a preacher, doesn't it?
It sure does. As a matter of fact, you mentioned something there that when you went to the passage there, the way you answer this question is by going and reading it, and then reading more, reading the context. And if you just back up to chapter 3, verse 1, you see that Paul is talking about his ministry, and he continues all the way through, talking about how he planted and Apollos watered, that he's nothing. They're just ministers. It's God who gives the increase. But then there's something very interesting he says in verse 9, which helps us understand verse 15. He says, "For we are God's fellow workers. You are God's field. You are God's building."
Which is really neat, because 1 Peter chapter 2, if you go there, it talks about we are lively stones that are built upon the chief cornerstone, being Jesus Christ.
Exactly. And so if you take that and then just keep reading on past verse 15, he says, "Do you not know you are the temple of God, and that the Spirit of God dwells in you?" So he's talking about people. So that gold and silver and stones and wood and hay and straw, those are people. Those are Christians who have obeyed the gospel. And you think about it, whenever you look at the words he uses, he says that we're talking about a building, these workers. In verse 12, he says anyone builds. Verse 13, one's work. Verse 15, anyone's work. And so he's talking about, you said a minute ago, an evangelist.
Exactly.
And so what's happening is people who obey the gospel, the sad reality is not everyone is going to heaven. Matthew 7, verse 21 and forward says that. But the ones that do go through, isn't that a reward to an evangelist?
Oh, it is.
And so the ones that don't would be the ones that would be burned up, and talks about that in Revelation 20.
That'd be that wood, hay, and stubble. They never developed building into mature Christians.
Now, what does all of this sound like?
It sounds a lot like the parable of the sower, where the seed goes out and some of it goes to good ground, some of it does not.
Amen.